The Year of the Tiger is knocking, and people around the world are celebrating. Many embrace traditional festivities, including a unique underwater lion dance. But not everyone has been able to enjoy the holiday. That's as migrant workers in China fight to receive their paychecks. The FBI chief calls the Chinese Communist Party
more brazen, more damaging than ever before.
His remark comes days before the Beijing Olympics Opening Ceremony. 200 COVID-19 cases have been detected among Olympic athletes and staff. Among the infected patients, a U.S. gold medal hopeful. And 10,000 people in one Chinese city transported to a quarantine center. Thousands were seen lining up for hours in the rain, including parents with babies and the elderly. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. People around the world are welcoming the first day of the Lunar New Year, the Year of the Tiger. In Taiwan, one community celebrates with a traditional ceremony. Amid vibrant performances, a group of distinguished guests are pasting a traditional Chinese character onto a board, symbolizing virtue. It wishes residents good luck in the new year. In Malaysia, locals kick off the Lunar New Year with an especially unique lion dance underwater. Another dance group, this time in Cambodia, is preparing to bring traditional Chinese dragons and lions to life. Ahead of the New Year's dance, dancers stand in a circle and cheer each other on. As for food, a Thai dessert shop in Bangkok created dishes for a traditional New Year feast, all from coconut milk jelly. The unique creations include special molded cakes made to resemble steamed chicken, roast duck, and even pig's head. Festivities are unfolding in New York City's Chinatown, too. Chinese communities there gather to celebrate and pray for a safer and more prosperous year. U.S. Secretary of State Blinken honored Lunar New Year on the eve of the event, offering a wish to work together in 2022 and build a future of peace and prosperity for all. The same day, U.S. embassies in the Chinese cities of Beijing, Shenyang, and Wuhan also released holiday videos, wishing Chinese people a happy year of the tiger. The tiger is one of the 12 animals on the Chinese zodiac. The Year of the Tiger begins February the 1st and ends January 21st, 2023. Chinese tradition names tiger the king of all beasts. It's a symbol of strength, exorcising evils and braveness. To celebrate 2022 being the Year of the Tiger, 2 Siberian tiger cubs just made their debut to the public ahead of the holiday. Siberian tigers are among the world's largest wildcats. They are native to the far east of Russia, China, and North Korea. These animals are an endangered species, and their current population stands at less than 4,000. The 2 cubs are around 6 months old. They currently live in a wildlife reserve in Russia. Staff there describe them as playful. Aside from the cubs, the wildlife reserve is also home to 3 adult tigers. The reserve makes them practice their hunting skills regularly so that they can be released back to the wild if the population drops. The reserve also takes in orphan tigers, tigers involved in traffic accidents, or that suffered gunshot wounds. This year's Winter Olympic Games could be the most politically complicated in recent history. China is facing growing accusations of genocide. While the pandemic continues on, athletes must take virus tests before boarding the plane, after arriving, and they must get tested in Beijing every day while there. During the past week, China has detected 200 cases of the CCP virus among athletes and personnel linked to the Beijing Winter Olympics. Many show no symptoms.
Authorities are imposing a closed-loop bubble to keep participants, staff and media separated from the public. Some 3,000 athletes, along with coaches, officials, referees, federation delegates and media, are expected for the Games, due to run from February 4th to the 20th. Some tested positive before even arriving in China, like the world's leading women's ski jumper, Maritta Kramer of Austria, who tested positive in Germany at her last competition ahead of the Games, rescheduling her departure in an effort to get healthy in time for her competition. But Games organizers said most are testing positive after arrival at the airport. Russian biathlete Valeria Vasnetsova said her own Olympic ambitions were over after testing positive twice following her arrival in Beijing. She accounts for one of 3 Russian positive tests announced on Monday. In contrast to many countries seeking to live with COVID-19, China has isolated itself with a zero-tolerance policy, cancelling nearly all international flights. Olympic athletes and others must fly directly into the city on charter flights and are tested daily. The closed loop will allow them to move between accommodation and Olympic venues on official transport, but they are not allowed to move freely in public.
U.S. gold medal hopeful Elena Meyers-Taylor is now in a race against time. She tested positive for the CCP virus in Beijing. Right now, she is isolating in a hotel without symptoms. Taylor aims to win her first Olympic gold after winning 2 silvers and a bronze in previous Olympics. The bobsled events start in 2 weeks, and Taylor must return 2 consecutive negative tests before that. Among Chinese athletes, there is no report of tests that came back positive so far. Due to the cover-up history of the communist regime, we cannot verify these results independently. Now we take a look at a video going viral online. People in the video are saying, to repay our leader, we are ready to risk everything. Follow the party general secretary and go to the future together. This is not in North Korea, it's in China, at Tiananmen Square in the center of Beijing. These are Chinese athletes going to compete at the Winter Olympics. It happened last week, and the Chinese state-run TV station CCTV aired the scene, praising the athletes. The leader, or party general secretary, refers to the Chinese Communist Party's leader, Xi Jinping. And the athlete's phrase, to repay the leader, is worth a closer look. This is a mentality the Communist Party has infused in the Chinese people's minds, that all people in China should be thankful to the party and its leaders, because they provide the people with a happy life, and so the people should repay them. New reports from the southern Chinese city of Hangzhou are painting a dreary picture that says nearly 10,000 people lined up outside for hours, waiting in the rain to be quarantined. Friday afternoon, the city opted to send residents from 2 communities into controlled quarantine. A company located in one of them was found to have several positive Omicron infections, and many of the company's workers also live locally. Over 9,000 residents live there. City officials touted the move, saying they transferred 300 busloads containing nearly all residents to isolation centers. But residents suffer a lot from the rush transfer.
Men and women, young and old, a 2-month-old baby in its mother's arms, all put under quarantine. They also transferred old people in wheelchairs.
A post-complaint reads that residents had to line up in the rain for a couple of hours and then were packed into the bus and continued waiting for another hour. For those under quarantine, there is no way for them to get out.
They won't let you out. As for supplies, they put a stool at your door, knock on your door, and put the meals on the stool.
Some residents doubt the massive transfer will lead to more infections, but the authorities don't seem to care. Some are commenting, for the government, it's okay if you don't die in the city. That's what they call basically 0 cases. Dr. Zhang from Beijing Judicial System says the so-called basically 0 case is merely a word game.
They will transfer all potential positive cases outside the city, thus to create a basically 0 case situation in the city.
Hangzhou reported 13 new cases the last day of January. All are found in the centrally controlled quarantine site. Due to the Chinese Communist regime's history of cover-up, NTD cannot verify the real number of the cases. And while some must stop working to quarantine, it seems others must continue working, but without pay. But now they are speaking up. An angry crowd broke into the building of a real estate company. They had been begging for days outside. The group says they are owed wages. They are mostly migrant workers. And in the southern Chinese province of Guangxi, another group held banners asking for their wages. Some of these migrant workers turned to local officials for help. In the central Chinese city of Luoyang, another group of migrant workers held signs begging for the money owed to them.
30岁的年轻人，还有60、70岁的老人，都在这洛阳市信访局门口跪着，为了讨薪，为了要工资，容易不容易？
It's not only the migrant workers who suffer. A video shows a group of people gathering in front of an agricultural Bank of China building. They appear to be accusing the bank of illegal lending. The group alleged an illegal operation cost them their homes. They say they're appealing to the authorities, but that it's hard for them to have a voice. Thousands of families reportedly became homeless due to the bank's actions. No word yet as to the bank's response. Now we look to Tianjin, a metropolis next to Beijing. Some residents there are upset with the regime's propaganda. Their residential compound has been put under strict lockdown for weeks. Residents told NTD that volunteers have been helping deliver groceries to them. A local state-controlled media outlet put out a story about how residents there are grateful for the officials' help. It says local officials donated milk, fruit, and flour to residents, and that officials are also helping to deliver groceries. But two sources on the ground there tell a different story. To protect their safety, we have given them pseudonyms and distorted their voices.
The media report says officials have donated food, but up to this point, we haven't seen anything.
Another resident tells a similar story.
We didn't receive any so-called donations at all.
Resident Wang Yang says other residents there called it propaganda, and around 100 residents gathered to question local authorities about the report, but officials have not offered any response. He says even though there was no violence during the confrontation, there have been more police cars touring around the neighborhood and monitoring the residents. And on the eve of the Lunar New Year, the head of U.S. intelligence renewed his warning about the threat of the Chinese Communist Party. The FBI chief says it's more damaging than ever, and that's with the Beijing Olympics just around the corner.
Federal Bureau of Investigation Director Christopher Wray made the comments at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library on Monday, just days before Beijing is set to occupy the global stage by hosting the Winter Olympics. During his speech, Wray explained it's critical that people focus on the Chinese Communist regime's threat.
I've spoken a lot about this threat since I became FBI director, but I want to focus on it here tonight because in many ways it's reached a new level, more brazen, more damaging than ever before. And it's vital that all of us focus on that threat together.
Wray added that hackers backed by the Chinese regime are pilfering more personal and corporate data than all other countries combined.
When we tally up what we see in our investigations, over 2,000 of which are focused on the Chinese government trying to steal our information and technology, there is just no country that presents a broader threat to our ideas, our innovation, and our economic security than China.
He also echoed a major statistic from his department.
The Chinese government steals staggering volumes of information and causes deep, job-destroying damage across a wide range of industries. So much so that, as you heard, we're constantly opening new cases to counter their intelligence operations, about every 12 hours or so.
Wray said Beijing's economic espionage will push American companies and workers behind, though he made a point to distinguish the Chinese Communist Party from the Chinese people.
Now, having said that, I do want to be clear that the Chinese government and the Chinese Communist Party pose the threat we're focused on countering, not the Chinese people, and certainly not Chinese Americans who are themselves frequently victims of the Chinese government's lawless aggression.
Wray's speech clarifies that in the face of Russia-Ukraine tensions, the U.S. still sees China as its biggest threat to long-term security. Beijing has repeatedly rejected those accusations.
How soon might China declare war on Taiwan? An influential Chinese academic says it will happen within the next 5 years. In an interview with Nikkei Asia on Monday, Jing Rong, an advisor to Beijing on foreign policy, said China's Communist leader Xi Jinping will employ force to conquer Taiwan by 2027, the same year the party celebrates its 100th birthday. Jing is the Associate Dean in Renmin University School of International Studies. He is known as one of China's most vocal hawks. When asked about the U.S.'s military reaction, Jing says the Chinese military already has a posture superior to that of the U.S., adding they have, quote, the capability to unify Taiwan by force within 1 week, and, quote, can defeat any U.S. force within 1,000 nautical miles of the coastline. According to Nikkei, China's Navy could keep U.S. ships out of Chinese waters and launch missile attacks against American ships. Jing also pushed back against words from Japan's former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe that a Taiwan emergency is a Japan emergency. He warns Japan not to intervene, claiming the U.S. already cannot win against China on this. If Japan intervenes, China will have no choice but to defeat Japan as well. What should Taiwan do? Jing says the island's only choice is to talk with Beijing about the so-called unification as soon as possible. Jing's theory appears to echo a view expressed by China's ambassador to the U.S. earlier last week. The ambassador Qin Gan issued a warning on Thursday that there could be, quote, a military conflict between the U.S. and China over Taiwan's future status. This statement about the U.S., China, and Taiwan appears unusually direct. Previously, Beijing had spoken in more general terms, such as saying that the U.S. is playing with fire over Taiwan issues. This week, Beijing sent nearly 40 aircraft near Taiwan, the latest of several such demonstrations. A Chinese scholar says Beijing's threats against Taiwan will only fuel hate. The retired Peking University sociologist Zhen Yefu last Wednesday said a war on Taiwan would be disastrous.
He wants to raise a voice, even with China's current strict censorship and control of public opinion, that almost every Chinese person's future will be affected by such military attacks on Taiwan, not just the decision makers.
Zhen is known for his outspoken political views on China. In a social media post, he says Taiwan is virtually independent and that frequent military threats from the mainland have already sparked the island's hatred. He says it could turn into a situation where Beijing, Washington, and Taipei find themselves unable to make concessions to, quote, save their faces. He warns this could eventually lead to nuclear war between China and the U.S. Zhen says that's why Beijing should immediately give up its hardline approach, wanting to conquer Taiwan by military force.
Officials in Beijing claim military threats could help deter Taiwan's independent force. But in fact, Taiwan has been independent for more than 70 years. It never belonged to China.
Speaking about Taiwan's 7 decades of independence, Zhen said 45 years of separation did not prevent East and West Germany from unifying.
Zhang especially mentioned the example of East and West Germany. Their reunification at the end wasn't because of military threats. It was realized by the will of the people.
Zhen says too many wars have started with threats that could not be de-escalated, but authorities soon censored his post. A China expert from the University of Michigan explains the biggest threat Beijing faces right now is actually themselves. She made the remarks at a U.S. hearing. NTD's Don Ma has more.
The U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission held the hearing last week. Here's what the expert said.
I think one of the biggest dangers now facing the Chinese regime is the problem of bureaucrats not daring to speak the truth. And this has been exacerbated with Xi's authoritarian turn. He does not appear to be open to dissent, to honest feedback. There was, for instance, recently news that the Chinese government says that negative news about the economy should not be reported anymore. When Chinese leaders create a climate when people don't dare to speak the truth, they in turn deny themselves of good information. Right? So it creates a vicious cycle.
She says Beijing will continue down its current path unless a major policy change happens.
That no change can happen unless the top leader says, yes, it's okay for you to speak the truth. And then the Chinese bureaucrats will speak, and then they will realize they in fact have many problems and limitations and missteps.
Though she says Beijing leaders still have one source of honest information, but it doesn't come from within China.
I would also like to point out that Chinese leaders today do have a very important source of feedback, and that is international opinion. So the Chinese leaders are able, through censorship and manipulating the media, to silence opposition within China, but they can't silence opposition and criticisms around the world.
The international community had hoped that China would change its authoritarian ways in the early 2000s. At the time, then U.S. President Bill Clinton persuaded the international community on the merits of China joining the World Trade Organization. And in 2001, China was allowed in. It was believed that alongside capitalist economic growth, China's middle class would become a driving force demanding political change from Beijing. There was a problem, though, as another expert at the hearing pointed out. Most of China's middle class made a living working for the state.
So there's no independent middle class in China. In China, when we talk about the middle class, it's like majority of people who work for the Chinese government or state-owned enterprises. So when we talk about middle class in China, we're not talking about, like mom and pop's, stores and stuff. The people who own mom and pop stores in China, they're in the lower class. They're not making.
Professor Ong says that if China is to change, it must first come from Chinese Communist Party head Xi Jinping. Don Ma, NTD News.
And that's all for today's China in Focus. But before you go, here's a short glimpse into this Wednesday's special report. A game of chess that spans the globe. China seems to be winning. The U.S. doesn't even realize it's playing. At stake, the waters of the Pacific Ocean. Whoever controls them gains military power. China has been buying up islands in the region, paving the way for future military bases. Unlike news from the South China Sea and larger Indo-Pacific regions, those actions haven't been making headlines. Rather, the silent development is much closer to U.S. shores. In this special report, we look at what China's presence there means for the U.S. going forward and what can be done to even the playing field.